Dead Space is often hailed as one of the best horror video games of all time, but this is not a game. It's an experience, and I think the following words of Gumball Watterson pretty much sum up Dead Space.
You don't win, you survive.
Being 100% honest, I am not sure where to start my review, but just before I sat down to start writing, someone messaged me asking if Dead Space was fun. And my honest answer, I'm not sure I would call it fun, but it was an experience that I enjoyed. Is it a game like Jurassic the Hunted, Duke Nukem 3D, or Bright Memory Infinite, where you just run in guns blazing everywhere while banger soundtracks run in the background pumping you with adrenaline? No. Dead Space is a title of caution, wariness, and keeping your head on a swivel, and is one of the most anxiety-filled games I've ever played of the Xbox 360 generation, and probably the fifth most anxiety-filled title I've ever played, outdone only by Shell Shock 2, Vincent Lade's Jawbreaker, Ripout, and Ubisoft's Zombie, with Ripout clearly taking some influence from Dead Space. What I mean by saying this game has anxiety, largely in the first half of the game, you're really forced to stay on your toes and stay alert, as danger can come from literally anywhere. You only really have a weak laser cutter at the beginning, probably not a lot of ammo, so you need to conserve your rounds. You don't have much health, you have a tiny inventory, enemies are toughest at the start of the game while you're just trying to get a grip on how the game and everything in it works, so for the first half of this title, you'll definitely get spooked on many occasions, and I would not suggest this game to someone with heart issues. But after the first 8 hours, the anxiety, horror elements, and desperation effects do kind of start to wear off. You've learned to expect jump scares. You know how to deal with enemies. You have better weapons and upgrades. And after a while, you're not really fazed by anything Dead Space has to offer anymore. So the first half of this title, a great horror experience. I highly recommend. But the second part of Dead Space did kinda just drag on. Note, it took me about 16 hours to complete this game, and I think that's what held Dead Space back the most in my opinion. The length. It was too much of a good thing. After a while, I was kinda like, okay, Dead Space, you made your point. Can we finish up soon? And I almost feel like some sections were added just to make the game longer. Like, oh, you gotta go to this area and remove these asteroids. You gotta go track these access codes down. Say what you will, but some levels did just feel like filler content, and the story, while enjoyable, did take its sweet time to progress. Now, to be fair, on a second playthrough, I could probably shave off at least an hour from my time, but still, I wish Dead Space was shorter, and that's probably my biggest issue with this installment. Now, backtracking some, I'm going to go into some more detail about the horror elements, which were very well done. You have the basics, of course: creepy monsters, eerie sounds, jump scares, the stuff you'd expect from about any horror game. But one very unique horror element that Dead Space holds is in its combat, and how you have to dismember enemies to efficiently kill them, which definitely helped nail in a sense of dread early on. As in most games, body shots get the job done, but here you have to aim for limbs, which is a bit harder, and your starting laser cutter is rather difficult to aim. There were also psychological horror effects, like watching a mad scientist experimenting on a man begging for mercy, watching people driven mad by the marker offing themselves, more on that later, seeing a barely alive man clutching his dismembered leg while wailing in pain, just to name a few things. And I'd say the sheer amount of gore in this game helped drive home a horror effect. While not quite on the same level as, say, Dead Island, Dead Space has a lot of bloodshed. I mean, you literally have to cut your opponents to pieces while they're still alive. How many other games play like that? And overall, I'd say combat was enjoyable. While challenging and frustrating at times, it didn't feel super stiff, like Silent Hill, or too fluid, like a Call of Duty game, but fell in a safe medium of being stiff enough to fit a horror environment, but not too stiff to be annoying. I played on medium difficulty, by the way. As far as weapons go, the Ripper/Buzzsaw was a huge game changer because of how effective it was against most enemies. It didn't have a lot going range-wise, but it packed a punch in close quarter combat and quickly became my primary weapon. I also purchased the flamethrower, good for crowd control and tiny aliens, and I bought the laser rifle, which held a lot of ammo but didn't do a lot of damage. And we already discussed the laser cutter. You can upgrade your weapons and gear at crafting tables using super rare power nodes, but you really had to spend your nodes wisely, as you'd sometimes be forced to buy nothing so you could purchase your desired upgrade. Like, you literally would just buy a empty slot. I guess the idea here was to make the player really put some thought into what they wanted to upgrade, although it could be a tad annoying. You can purchase new weapons and suits at stores scattered around the game after finding their blueprints, in addition to being able to sell unwanted items or store excess gear in your locker until you needed it. The locker was a really great feature that I'm glad the devs added. Moving on to the story, this title clearly took some inspiration from the movie Alien, both roughly being about mining operations that are secretly attempts at seeking alien life/ways to weaponize it, and things go awry. I think that was about how the movie Alien went. Been a while since I watched it though, so feel free to correct me. And I was genuinely bummed out when one character died, and there were definitely some unexpected turns in the story, but I thought it was kind of odd how the story writers made it seem like Isaac, your character's girlfriend, was alive when she pretty clearly wasn't. One big criticism I do have about the story, however, is at one point a military ship was en route to destroy the ship you were on, and one alien managed to get on board the other ship and kill almost the entire crew single-handedly. Like, a ship full of soldiers armed to the teeth can't stop one alien, but your character, a non-combatant engineer, kills probably a couple hundred of them? Huh? Just plot armor, I guess. But yeah, the story in a nutshell. You're an engineer who went to fix a space station, it's overrun by nightmarish aliens, and you have to return this giant rock called the Marker to make the aliens happy. And this title did have a ton of enemy variety. I don't know any of them by their real names, but you had little shrimps who attacked in swarms, one I call Big Hoss. Zombieland fans might get it, who's a giant mutant with really tough frontal armor, the ones I called Little Punks, who jump around with 3 arms in their back and shoot projectiles at you, really annoying wall mutants, the list goes on and on. And they were all very well designed and unique from each other, not counting some armored variants. And this title had some interesting bosses, like a knockoff Sarlacc pit or whatever on Earth the final boss is supposed to be. Now, up to this point, I've mostly just spoken praise about Dead Space, but this title holds one thing that I really just did not enjoy at all, and that is the anti-gravity sections. I can't fully explain why I don't like these sections, but I just don't. It could be a little discombobulating, and maybe that's it, but again, I can't really put my finger on it. But the anti-gravity sections just did not really fit in my opinion, especially the one with the big meteor. I, and a lot of other people, got stuck on that section from what I read on a YouTube tutorial comment section, as that area was just really unclear as to what you were expected to do. Now, thankfully, I only looked up 2 tutorials for the entire game, the meteor and some really wonky section that was just the game's logic not making sense. So yeah, the anti-gravity sections did not help Dead Space if you ask me. I don't think I would have minded a couple of these, but there were at least 8 anti-gravity sections I believe, and they honestly just discouraged me from continuing at times. Graphics-wise, this title looks great. Performance-wise, I don't remember any issues, although I found its long loading times to just be a little odd running on a modern PC. The voice acting was pretty good, with a good soundtrack, I guess, although a lot of this game was more of just eerie sounds and noises than music. Ending my review itself, I really appreciate Isaac's navigator thingy that shows you exactly where you need to go so you won't get lost. A couple notes apart from my review, it wasn't until pretty late into Dead Space that I learned you can destroy boxes you see scattered around, so I missed out on a ton of loot. And also the Steam version of this game sadly doesn't have achievements, although it does have trading cards and great controller support. In conclusion, as I stated earlier, Dead Space isn't a game, it's an experience, and one I highly recommend for any fan of horror. I believe Dead Space earns a 9.5 out of 10 by my grade scale, with its main drawbacks being its long length and the anti-gravity sections. And Dead Space undoubtedly left its mark in the world of horror gaming and just gaming as a whole. As I can tell, games S.C.A.R.S Above and Ripout clearly took influence from Dead Space, and while I haven't played it, I heard the Calestro, however you pronounce that, the Calestro protocol is pretty much a Dead Space clone. As far as similar games go, I'd suggest the aforementioned Ripout if you want a slow-paced sci-fi horror FPS, and S.C.A.R.S Above if you want a sci-fi third-person shooter. And I've reviewed both games, by the way, link in the end cards. Well, y'all, that is all from me for today. I hope someone enjoyed my video. I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments and what you think about my review. Thanks for watching. For anyone new to my channel, I mostly play, review, and discuss zombie and horror games, so feel free to check out some of my other content if that maybe sounds interesting. And yes, I do plan on reviewing Dead Space 2 at some point. Anyways, hope everyone has a blessed day. Thanks again for watching. Always remember that God loves you all very much. Peace.